Hi, my name is Alex Williams, founder of The New Stack, and you're listening to the New Stack Analyst podcast, a show about application, development, and management at scale. Thanks for joining us. GoDaddy is the sponsor for this week's episode of the New Stack Analysts. The hosting company has made a significant investment in OpenStack and its own internal infrastructure. They're worth checking out. Learn more at GoDaddy.com. Hi, my name's Alex Williams, founder of The New Stack, and here for another episode of the New Stack Analysts, sponsored today by GoDaddy. And GoDaddy is going to talk with us a little bit about their experiences with containers on OpenStack. OpenStack has been around for a few years now, and containers have come on like a charge. And at the New Stack, we write quite a bit about the container ecosystem, so we're quite interested in hearing GoDaddy's take on how they're applying containers and what it means for their overall OpenStack deployments. Join with me is Joab Jackson, Managing Editor at the New Stack and co-host for the show. Hey, Joab.
Hey, hello.
And with us are Shaheeda, Nizar, and Josh Harlow. And Shaheeda, why don't you introduce yourself, and then Josh, tell us who you are and what you do.
That's great.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Shaheeda Nizar. I am Director of Engineering at GoDaddy. I run the OpenStack team. And Josh, go for it.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm Josh Harlow. I'm a PTL on OpenStack of the Oslo project there. I'm also the tech lead and somewhat architect and open source evangelist for OpenStack at GoDaddy. Been involved in OpenStack for a long time. Not as long as it goes back to like 7 years, but for about 5 years of that, been involved in OpenStack. And going into container stuff as well. So looking forward to talking to you guys about it.
We first started discussing containers in OpenStack back in 2014 at OpenStack in Paris. And we actually had an event there and talked about containers and their role in OpenStack. It was very early days. But the surge in interest has been noteworthy over since then. And at the OpenStack event in Austin, there was quite a bit of conversation and increasing discussion about the role of container platforms and container orchestrators and their uses with OpenStack. And for our purposes, we're interested in your story about how you have been using OpenStack and when you started to think about using containers and what the reasons were for that. Maybe that might be a good place to start.
Okay. I'll take that one. So GoDaddy 2 years ago decided to go all in on OpenStack. And since then, we have OpenStack deployed on our private cloud and in our public cloud. On private cloud, today, developers can get virtual machines in under a minute and use it for production workloads and CI/CD deployments, and for various other workloads as well. And the natural progression from there is to containers. And the reason for that is, as you've said, Alex, the surge in interest, the momentum for containers has been astounding. Containers have an inherent virtue, which is the way they are built. Reduces the overhead for deployment, DevOps overhead, and hence everybody is trying to embrace containers as a great tech for whether it is for DevOps efficiency or even for portability, right? With the ability to for better portability with containers, you can sort of reduce the complexity of different hardware SKUs in our data center as well. So there are efficiencies on multiple dimensions, and hence we're embracing containers with an open heart as well. And so at GoDaddy, all the new workloads that are being built, new services that are being built, we're looking to build them as containerized workloads. And once we do that, then the questions that come up are, what is the container tech we should use? What is the orchestration tech? Should we sort of create a custom one? Should we use the one that's currently available, use the ones that are currently available, and which one should we use? For us, obviously, it didn't make sense to go reinvent it. When we looked at different options, there were several good options. And so we can talk about how we came about making those decisions and what that means for OpenStack. But this is sort of how we arrived at containers.
Terrific. I know you guys, you offer a lot of services, domain names, but also like, web hosting, email services, that sort of thing. So over time, do you see your entire infrastructure moving to OpenStack? Is it that robust and flexible to handle all the services that you're offering?
That's correct. Actually, our goal, in fact, internally we talk about OpenStack everything and everywhere. That we want OpenStack available in all of our data centers, and we want all workloads to be running on top of OpenStack, whether it is in containerized workloads or legacy workloads. We're not there yet, but we're working towards that.
Just a point for me from being a little bit of a community aspect is that it's a continuum too, right? OpenStack at a current phase in time may have certain problems for scale or for complexity, but I don't think if they're working, the community and others and all of their companies are working on making it work for our use case and theirs as well. So it's a shared kind of goal, not just a point in time thing.
Agree. Yeah.
Right.
Good point.
I'm very curious about, I guess, the former platform or platforms. The company's been pretty quick to respond to market trends, but obviously there must have been some pain points or some bottlenecks. What is it that OpenStack is allowing you guys, OpenStack and containers are allowing you guys to do even more quickly?
OpenStack in containers is somewhat of a different topic, which is actually a fair point. We're looking into that one as well.
Okay.
OpenStack in containers, correct?
Right.
Not containers on OpenStack. Yeah, OpenStack in containers is an interesting one. This is more of a, at least to my knowledge, more recent trend. We are looking at it. Cola is the project Josh has been sort of tinkering with, playing around, trying to evaluate. We do think that it would be useful, especially for minimizing the cost of upgrades, as once new release of OpenStack comes out, as we upgrade our local deployments. I think containerizing OpenStack itself, I think definitely has some efficiencies there.
How are the cost savings? How do you expect those costs? Why do you expect there to be cost savings? What are some of the reasons for that?
Yeah, so a little bit on that, since I was also part of the creator of a project that the GoDaddy folks are using that predates the container stuff, is that there's this issue of how do you actually deploy OpenStack, right? So what Yahoo and what GoDaddy went with was a packaging solution, and it's basically what that means is that you have to have developers that understand that packaging system, as well as developers that understand how to modify whatever kind of customizations you have. Then how does that interact with the packaging system, the two different various worlds of dependency management that like say, Python has, and the package management, for example, like RPMs have. So there's a lot of overhead around having a solution that is different, say, than the native solution. And containers allow you to sort of not have to worry about that as much, because the container, in a way, is a a whole system solution in a way for dependencies. So you don't necessarily have to worry about whether there's RPM packages inside of it or whether there's a separate kind of solution inside of it, because it sort of wraps up the whole thing as a container, right? So the overhead of all of the previous solution, and I think what others have used as well, it just takes a lot of time for doing any kind of transition to a newer code base or upgrade it when you need to do it. There's a lot of overhead that you have to take on, and I think we've seen it here, and I think I saw similar stuff at Yahoo, was that it takes like a single person, maybe a month really, depending on how knowledgeable they are of the packaging solutions, of the patches that you may have for customizations. It takes about a month to like change from release to release for what I've seen, or more maybe, I guess Shaheeda would mention. And that kind of barrier to entry, I think, is one thing we need to reduce. And containers, or putting OpenStack in containers, sort of helps out make that possible. And also another benefit is that it has a lot of community leadership right now. So there's a lot of active players that are helping making that better, right? There has never been, in my view, a large set of folks that are working on a single packaging solution. There will always be the folks that will work on, say, RPMs or the Debian equivalent, but those two groups have never merged too well because, well, they're sort of different. And a container kind of a project is actually sort of a merging of those two worlds into a new kind of model, right? And I think that's going to help us reduce a lot of time to actually change OpenStack releases or add additions or remove additions or those kind of things.
I have a corollary question, and
Sure.
I'd like to turn it over to Joab. Corollary question is related to Apache Mesos. I just came back from Mesos Con, and Mesos talks about Mesosphere in particular talks about the data center operating system, and which has been open sourced. And I'm curious about did you guys ever look at Mesos as a project, or was Mesos still quite young, at that time, and thus the decision to go with OpenStack?
So this is actually backing up like 3 years ago or something. At that point, is what you're saying?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
2 years ago, neither of us were there at that time, but as we understand it, at that time it was still relatively nascent. DCOS was open source, just much more quickly. So I don't think it was in the running.
Mm-hmm.
And OpenStack had some track record, some history of success. There was an OpenStack deployment even at Yahoo, and they've used it with a relatively good amount of success there. And a lot of leadership came from Yahoo, and that's a very natural choice as well.
Mm-hmm.
I remember when I did the evaluation of various OpenStack-like products at Yahoo must have been like 5.5 years ago. Mesos wasn't even anywhere in that list. It was like CloudStack, I think. Eucalyptus was another one. OpenStack, and I think there may have been another one that I'm not remembering right now. But Mesos, I don't even think was around when I was starting to do an evaluation many years ago. I think it was probably 3 years ago that Mesos sort of popped up.
Yeah, on the horizon, yep.
Just another point to counter that is that Mesos has the use cases that we're going to probably look into, but
Mesos, the scheduler, not so much
the DCOS.
DCOS.
Right.
Excellent. I'm kind of curious, for a company like GoDaddy, how do you justify to the business heads, developers or software engineers working on open source projects, even the projects of the technologies you're using in-house? What's the rationale? I guess what's the soundbite that you use that perhaps other companies could use as well? The business case, I guess.
Yeah, that's actually relatively easily, in some ways, could be even intuitively obvious. But let me just give you some sort of quantified numbers that might help. we have a relatively small team of people because we are leveraging the open source community. We're able to accomplish, a deployment in private cloud, public cloud, and building on top of it. Rather, if we had started from scratch, tried to build a cloud orchestration mechanism from scratch, that would have taken a large number of people and a lot of time before we arrived at that. So its economy is just very obvious. And the advantage with open source is just the scale, the number of developers who are contributing to it is something like 25,000 developers that are contributing into it.
Also long-term support, right?
Long-term support. And we're able to build on top of all the developments made by such a large community. So there's just no argument there.
Yeah, I sort of reckon it as like a river. And if you're a raft on a river, you can try to paddle up the river, and that may be equivalent to like building your own solution, but eventually the river is going to push you back down stream, right? So I think if people that try to build their own raft that goes up the river, it's going to have a hard time trying to like go against the stream here.
And Josh, I'm curious about the project that you're working on, in OpenStack and how it relates to containers.
So the one that I'm working on, it's not necessarily totally container specific. It's more about components that others would use. There's the project that I work on is called Oslo, which I am the PTL of. It's basically a core foundational library provider, basically, in a way you could call it that. So it provides common functionality that spans many projects. So a container project, for example, would take advantage of that. Are you thinking of maybe the COLA one that I'm looking at as well, or the one that I'm the lead of? Just making sure.
Well, there's one you mentioned that you're the lead of, and I was, and that was when I was thinking about specifically. But I guess then the secondary one would be the one related to the containers.
Sure. So yeah, the first one, I think it's just more of a supporting functionality that a container project would use. And
right.
I think they are using. The COLA one I'm looking into is interesting because it basically it sort of is the foundational part that other companies are working on. I think AT&T's in there, I think Cisco, Oracle maybe. So they're all working on how to make the container solution, OpenStack in containers, actually a feasible task. So there's 3 or 4 parts of that actually. So there's the building the containers that this COLA project does, and then there's also the deployment of the containers and active management. So COLA is trying to actually do all these tasks inside of the project. So it's interesting to see how they're progressing, taking on such a big goal, because it's a very large goal, and it's been interesting tinkering around with it to see how they accomplish this.
Kind of curious about Oslo. What does Oslo do?
I guess it may be a good way to describe it is that we have an example. Let's say you have each project has a shared functionality of needing to do configuration out of files or maybe via the command line. So Oslo provides a home for a project or a library in a way that provides a standard configuration pattern or framework for the various projects to use. There's other ones as well related to messaging, to state machines, to workflow management, to basic utility code that everybody shares. In a way, it allows people to move from projects to projects without having to relearn various concepts, like say this project uses configuration library X, this other project uses configuration library Y, and now they have to relearn how to do things when they're moving across code bases. So the Oslo group as a whole tries to standardize these things and unify them so various projects don't have to re-implement them and don't have to have knowledge isolated to one group, and then when it moves to another group they have to completely relearn everything. It's composed of about 30 libraries or 31 libraries with pretty much any kind of functionality you can think of. One of them does it or provides it. So that's the group I maintain.
And so these are, so they're libraries themselves, or are you talking about the I guess, the interface to the libraries or the?
It's both. It's libraries themselves that the Oslo group maintains and provides ownership over. And the APIs, they're not the REST APIs, but the APIs that projects use, they also have to be provided to those projects, so in a stable manner, so that libraries and projects that use them don't break continuously, right? So there's a lot of work to actually make that happen. It's interesting because we have to integrate with so many various projects. I think there's like 50 projects in OpenStack now, and each one of them uses a piece of Oslo. So there's stability concerns that have to be thought about, compatibility across the various releases of the Oslo libraries. A lot of interesting stuff that it's new for me, and it's been interesting trying to work through all the different kind of things that have come up and keep on coming up, and yeah, it's been interesting.
Let's take a quick break and then get back to the show. GoDaddy is the sponsor for this week's episode of the new Stack Analysts. The hosting company has made a significant investment in OpenStack and its own internal infrastructure. They're worth checking out. Learn more at GoDaddy.com. Now let's get back to the show. The topic that we are focusing on today is related to containers and containers' role in OpenStack. And so I would like to shift the conversation to discuss, your own participation in the overall community related to containers and how you see its maturity and progress. And perhaps we can start with talking about Magnum, the project that is kind of core to the container story with OpenStack, and how you guys are involved in it, and what you're thinking about how it applies to GoDaddy.
Sure. So I can go into, let's maybe go back. We can do a little history of where we started.
Mm-hmm. And maybe you could tell us a little about what Magnum is for people who may.
Oh yeah, sure. So Magnum is a project that started, I think, about 2 years ago in OpenStack. It was sort of built out of the experiences that Nova folks had with containers, and how the Nova as a group didn't feel it was the best place for containers to be inside of it. So there was a new project form called Magnum that was going to be, or was trying to be, a container service for OpenStack that has various interpretations, which one of them, it turns out that Magnum chose a path, at least it's where it sort of, it abstracts away or the deployment and management of various container orchestration engines itself. So you can imagine that it can deploy Kubernetes on VMs for you, or it can deploy Swarm or other container engines as well. Mm-hmm. So that's the current state of Magnum is this container engine deployment system. They recently just updated their mission statement to actually reflect that, I think. In the past summit that came out of the Austin summit was the goal to do that. But as for where GoDaddy stands, do you want to give a little overview of the container space where we think it is going internally, Shaheeda?
Yeah, sure. So the two things at GoDaddy that were relevant when it came to containers is the container tech itself. And then once you build containers using a certain tech, how do you orchestrate them? How do you deploy them? Right? So which orchestration tech do we use? So what we arrived at is Docker clearly had the right momentum, right community contributions, et cetera. We settled on Docker. Then the question was, how do we deploy them on top of OpenStack, or why even OpenStack, right? The containers have to run on some compute resources.
Right.
And at GoDaddy, our compute resources come from OpenStack. So for us, it's obvious that we had to run containers on top of OpenStack. Mm-hmm. And the next natural progression was, what's the way to run containers on top of OpenStack? And so we looked at Magnum because that was the only one about 6 months ago. It was being referred to as container as a service. So we looked at Magnum. And what Magnum gave is a very quick way to get an orchestration engine off the top 3 that were in the market at the time, to get one of them up and running. And then from that point on, you use the API of that orchestration engine directly. And what that means is that you can use Magnum to get a Kubernetes up and running and then operate using Kubernetes API. Same with Docker Swarm or Mesos. And what we found in trying to evaluate Magnum was wasn't very well suited for our networking needs. And so we ended up deciding that we do want to use Kubernetes as the orchestrator, but not through Magnum. So we actually ended up writing a tool chain that would deploy for our environments. We intend to put those back in open source community.
How is it not suited to your networking needs?
So what Magnum does is it uses some heat templates underneath to create clusters, Kubernetes clusters. And what we needed was to be able to modify those heat templates to add network zones that are specific to our network into those templates, and there was no easy way to do that.
Heat is, explain what heat is again.
Right. Heat is OpenStack's declarative way of orchestrating your virtual machines.
And other resources.
And other resources, yes. Yes.
So you needed a better way to, so help me back up a little bit more about the zones. And so what the issues there with the zones?
So network zones are generally what are used to sort of separate different kinds of resources. For example, if you have resources that are internal only, meaning services that are internal only versus services that are accessed by your customers versus services that are internal production workloads. So you want to sort of separate these into different network zones so you can have different firewall rules and different security policies. And so part of deploying an operating system or deploying a service on compute resources in a data center is sort of orchestrating your resources onto the right network zones. And that part, we're still in the process of understanding how other data center operators do this, but for us, that security zones are extremely important because we do operate private clouds, public clouds, and different kinds of workloads. So for us to be able to deploy our compute resources onto the right network zones, the standard heat templates used by Magnum were not working out.
So
did that then lead to your own workflow that you needed to develop, the tool workflow? I'm
going to back up a little bit and say that even if I think also the other barrier was that Magnum as a concept, I don't know if it's necessarily what we wanted to provide. Right. So it's not just that it was a little bit hard to work for our network topology, which it was because of various internal restrictions and various public assumptions that the heat templates made. But there was also a general kind of, I'm not sure what to call it, maybe it's a feeling that Magnum, the goal of Magnum wasn't exactly what we expected it to be.
Correct.
And we wanted to move in the direction of a goal that we sort of believed was going to be a goal that would actually be sustainable. And I think it may disagree with some of what the Magnum community thinks that goal is, but that's fine. I mean, there's a disagreement that's allowed, and that's okay. But I think that's why, like, we evaluated Magnum. We're like, oh, we have this network restriction that it also has. We have these restrictions there. But we also have a fundamental kind of philosophical question. Is that where in that direction of giving customers or giving internal users orchestration engine and then leaving the management and operation of that engine to them, or leaving it to a combination of them plus Magnum, is that the right path forward? And I sort of believe, and Shaheeda can correct me if I'm wrong, that we still don't sort of see that as the right path to go on, even though it is a path that others find valuable, which is fine.
Yeah. More specifically, I think what we would like to see is a comprehensive container as a service API.
Oh, okay.
Which is a little bit different than the goal of Magnum as it currently exists, which is cool. There's another project that's popping up in OpenStack that's getting a little bit of traction, this thing called Higgins. I think it's got a new name now. They've had some discussions on renaming it for legal reasons or something. That project may focus around actually containers as a service. How they accomplish it, I think, is to be decided.
Yeah.
But that's fine. I mean, it seemed that goal of that project seems more aligned, at least where it is right now, which is sort of not decided. But I think that's more where we would have liked the vision of the container service to be.
And something that is more directly integrated with OpenStack. For example, better integration with Keystone, which is the identity service. Better integration with Nova itself, so you can expand and contract the compute resources itself. Today with Magnum, you kind of have to manage that from the outside to add or remove compute resources. A container as a service API that's comprehensive would natively know about OpenStack and abstract out some of these concepts into simple primitives offered by the API.
Excellent. So sounds like overall you would want, if I got this correctly, for, I guess, your line of business administrators, I'm not sure if that's the exact term, but you want the administrators to deal directly with the container engine, Kubernetes or Mesos or what have you, and not worry about the underlying OpenStack support. But at the same time, you want OpenStack to establish zones so that different lines of business will be separate from each other.
Yeah, that's one part of it, yes.
Mm-hmm.
The other part is the native integration or the integration between an orchestration engine like Kubernetes and OpenStack, abstracted out from people who are laying containers on top of the service.
So that's where the container service comes into play.
Correct.
Interesting. The container service is an interesting angle, one we're looking at in the new stack. And what's interesting about it, I'm just actually looking at this story that we ran 2 months ago about Karina by Rackspace,
Right.
which is one of the early entrants into the container as a service market, and it's powered by OpenStack. And actually, the project lead for that has been Adrian Otto, right? Who is a Rackspace engineer there. I'm curious about that. Do you look at a service like Karina as an alternative, or do you think that there is something else that is required here for you?
I think the goals of Karina are somewhat different from what we are looking for. Karina probably is more of a direct competitor or comparison to Amazon's container service.
Okay.
ECS. Or at least that's how I sort of look at it, where people who have their own containers can find a compute resource using Karina API or ECS API to run them on. And a little bit of orchestration as well. But what we need internally is not so much a multi-tenant way of bringing up a cluster for every internal production workload, but somewhat abstracting that part of management into the fabric itself, so that they don't have to worry about, I need to use this API, bring up new cluster, and I need to manage my own cluster. It is somewhat managed for them. So we call it a managed containers cluster, or you could say managed Kubernetes cluster. And all they have to worry about is describing some primitives like, here are my containers. These are the ones that need to talk to each other. This is how many instances it needs to run at any one point, and please manage it for me. So simpler primitives, rest of the management is pushed into the platform.
The rest of the managers are pushed into the platform.
Correct.
And the platform then would be defined as?
That would be container as a service,
Okay.
I suppose, or the engine that is exposing this container service facade or the API on top.
That's doing a lot of work underneath to make that description a reality and do whatever active management it needs to make that possible, right? Kubernetes is one of such solutions. Not that this Higgins project may be another one in the future. It's a little too early to tell. But.
Tell us a little bit more about Higgins.
So from what I've been attending their meetings for a little bit, it started off as at the summit, OpenStack Summit, there was a design session where there was the question of what is Magnum a container orchestration engine deployment project, or is it a container orchestration engine itself? Where the container orchestration engine would be like what we were just talking about, where we do active management, you would give it a sort of a template and spin up containers and manage them and connect them together. And the outcome of that was that people wanted to let a new container orchestration engine project try out, like let it happen. If it succeeds or not is TBD. And so that's where the redefinition of the Magnum mission to be more of understanding that it's more of a container orchestration engine deployment framework or API with some management as well in there, but it's a little that there's slight differences in that versus what a container orchestration engine can do. The primitives are different, how you use it's different. So Higgins was born out of that acceptance that they're a little bit different. There's a new space that could be opened up to actually make something like that. So Higgins has started off as, right now it's still starting off as trying to figure out what is the goal, what are the use cases of it, what do people think it could be doing. There's been ideas that are going around the mailing list on a bunch of Etherpads as well about what do people think it should be doing, what could it be doing, sort of planning. It's in the planning stage, but I think there's this opportunity for it to be something. What it will be, it's TBD. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Opportunity for it to be really as simple as anybody who's using, who needs to run a container does not need to know too much about how do I go acquire a virtual machine and how do I add that to this orchestration engine and how do I expand it, how do I contract it, or any of those things. Yep. It could be as simple as, I have a container and I want to run it. Please do it for me. Right.
So there's current discussions that are going on in the community about, is it this basic API like run a container or just create a container, or should it provide more advanced management kind of functionality? Like, here's my container plus a bunch of other things, make sure that it stays up, like 3 of them are replicated and always running. So from what I feel right now, they're more focusing on let's just get a container running, let's abstract away the underneath virtual machines that may back it. Let's abstract away how the complexity of that is managed for now and focus on the simple case, which I think is fine. We'll see where that goes. But that seems to be the current kind of mission, is how do we get a container and actually run it and provide that as a simple but I think valuable feature for folks who want to run containers that may not have expertise in how to make it happen, right?
Mm-hmm.
This leads me to wonder if one day GoDaddy itself will offer a containers as a service for developers and small businesses.
Remains to be seen.
So, we have a few minutes left. I'm curious, and I'd love to we can always pick up this conversation further to another point. We look forward to keeping in touch about your progress related to OpenStack and containers. But I'm curious now about your, what this speaks to in terms of your investment in container orchestration platforms and where you're making that investment. Is it going to be in Kubernetes?
That is correct. At the moment, we are very deeply involved, or at least relatively deeply involved in a container OpenStack SIG that started up quite recently, which aims to integrate Kubernetes with OpenStack natively. That's one thing that we are watching very closely. And we're also using Kubernetes and deploying it on top of OpenStack and trying to integrate Keystone into it. And as we make progress, as we find solutions that might be useful for the community, we intend to upstream them as well.
So in a way, you can think of it as Higgins or whatever this new project is, maybe providing a simple API that integrates with OpenStack and provides containers. And Kubernetes could be just theoretically, could be the advanced API that does the same kind of integration with OpenStack, but provides more of like a really like management of containers. It does a lot of the much more advanced functionality. And this new project that pops out that may or may not come to be successful could provide a simpler, more smaller use case. But they both have the same kind of OpenStack integration, or that they both work with the authentication that people have used Keystone. But that companies that are running OpenStack don't need to necessarily go and build out a whole new team, a whole new kind of or container service team that just specializes in this. Actually, a lot of the same concepts that OpenStack already has. So I think there's that sort of the unmet need that we at GoDaddy have, not just us, but others as well. Like, we want to be able to use the best of both worlds. And if those worlds are the same world, that's even better, right? I'm not saying that Kubernetes will go into the OpenStack umbrella, but saying more that they will be mutually beneficial kind of projects, right?
Yeah. And also one thing to note is that Kubernetes itself may not be necessary for everybody's production workloads or internal workloads or what have you. And there is a relatively, if not a learning curve, it is not completely trivial to run and operate it. So for simpler use cases, there is definitely a need to be filled by an API like Higgins that can make it very simple to run containers.
Keep us up to date on your progress. It sounds like you guys are doing some interesting work in this space.
Thank you.
Yeah, I guess my last question is it, what's the future? Is it containers or OpenStack, or what is the difference between the two? I mean, there's definitely a difference between the two, but we're hearing so many discussions now about Kubernetes actually running on OpenStack or OpenStack running on.
My view on this is that they aren't competing. Well, they may initially look like they're like at opposites right now, but I don't believe that's the longer term way this will work out. I believe they will be mutually beneficial partners. I don't know, maybe partners is not the best word, but that's sort of what it is. They will be partners that will specialize in doing what they're good at, and they'll use parts of the other project for what it's good at, right?
They have somewhat complementary functions until a point when one subsumes the other. But at the moment, we see them as complementary, and there is definitely a need for those two to work together.
Well, I foresee more interesting conversations in Barcelona for sure.
Yeah, no, definitely.
Yes. I think you are right, though, Alex, in that there are enough people calling for one to subsume the other. We know which one that is. That may happen, but I think it'll be a while. And until then, both of these have to operate in a complementary way. I don't think that is too much of a complexity. I think there is an easy way to integrate these two.
Yeah, I mean,
and a need also to integrate those two.
Yeah, each provides something that it's good at, and I think those things will still exist. The architecture may not be the same at some point, but that's fine, right?
Well, great. Well, Shaheeda and Josh, thank you very much for taking this time to talk. This has actually been very interesting.
Thank you, Alex.
We really enjoyed talking with you guys, about the actual work that you're doing, which is I think, for me, quite insightful, as we're often, trying to get into the depths of what OpenStack is and integration with containers and what that means. So appreciate your time and sharing that.
Yeah, no problem.
Thank you, Alex and Joab. It's been our pleasure.
And Joab, thanks for joining us. And and this will conclude this episode of the new Stack Analysts, and we look forward to being back again soon. GoDaddy is the sponsor for this week's episode of the new Stack Analysts. The hosting company has made a significant investment in OpenStack and its own internal infrastructure. They're worth checking out. Learn more at GoDaddy.com.